you're inspired to know that something is right. You feel this burning within your bosom. Well, I really did this concerning Jan within 24 hours after I met her. And so I knew that she was going to be the girl that I wanted to marry. And prior to that, marriage was probably the furthest from my mind, even though I was 23 then. Perhaps I reached puberty a little late. But anyway, she went shortly thereafter back to BYU. And later on, she came up at the end of the summer. Now, Jan is really a thinker, and she doesn't make decisions quickly. And she was considering going on a mission. Well, I guess I've wrecked maybe a couple of missions, but one day Jan and I went out to Ecola Beach State Park on the Oregon coast, and she kind of wanted to sit on the rocks and kind of think things over. I thought I should go along and do a little counseling with her. Anyway, I did, and I was subtly all day trying to kind of discourage her a little bit from going on a mission. Maybe I'll have to account for all these sometime up in heaven. But nevertheless, she didn't. I don't know if I had anything to do with it or not, but I guess maybe a day or so later, in a definite planned procedure, although probably not planned in a very romantic site, we were out in the kind of the wetlands on the side of the Columbia River, not far from Jan's parents' place. And I just decided, why waste time? And so I asked her to marry me. Well, almost instantaneously she cried. And I didn't know how to cope with that. While I had had two sisters, they didn't cry, and my mother rarely cried, and I honestly didn't cope with it. I had coped with a lot of things. I could scramble a jet from that crying girl. Well, she cried for a few minutes, and then afterwards she said, "Why aren't you even going to kiss me?" Well, again, that thought hadn't occurred to me, not being very romantic. So anyway, that day passed, I guess, once or twice before she went down to Long Beach to teach. Well, again, I think sometimes that these marriages are made in heaven, because many things, like I mentioned yesterday, that had I not gone into the Air Force, undoubtedly I would not have gone to Portland, therefore wouldn't have met Jan. And even the summer that she came to Portland, she was considering going back to Columbia University, and for some reason she didn't. Well, another little planned fate, I think, was that not long after she left, and this was probably in October, my commander there in the where I was stationed in Portland asked me if I would be interested in going on TDY, temporary duty, down to the Rand Corporation down in West Los Angeles, down there teaching. So I said, well, yeah, I think that would be a pretty nice idea. I still don't know why he picked me, because I certainly wasn't his favorite. In fact, I always thought that he kind of just looked down on me. He was a big drinker and a big party boy, and many of the others in our squadron were, and I was not. And anyway, I still don't know why he, of all people, that he asked me. Maybe he just wanted to get rid of me. I don't know. Anyway, I was down in with a Rand being, and I was going to school. Actually, what I was doing is learning. It was a training program for training people in the Air Force. And so I was down there for a month or so, and I think every night I commuted from Los Angeles down to Long Beach, and that was before there were freeways all over. I don't know how I survived the training, but anyway, I did. And I suspect that had I not been stationed down there, I probably wouldn't have married Jan, because I really don't think she knew me. She didn't do things quite as impulsively, instinctively perhaps as I did. So anyway, we became pretty well acquainted during that month. In fact, also I made good money. The time that I was down there, I got extra money, and we figured I could finance her full carat diamond during the time that I was stationed down there. At the end of this, then, she wanted to visit my family. She didn't even know anything about my family, and so we drove on our first premarital honeymoon from Long Beach up to Utah, and she slept most of the way, and naturally we had to drive non-stop to be proper. And we were out on the desert all before you got to Las Vegas. And all at once, this crying started again. She wanted to go back. Want to go back, you're going to have to walk. And it was very cold outside. Anyway, I talked her out of this, and so she continued with me. And so then we spent a day or so, including Thanksgiving, up at my parents' house in Lewiston. And she thinks it's traditional in our family that all the aunts and uncles on my father's side would come and just have a visit on Thanksgiving evening. And so they really came in earnest when Jan was there to meet this nice-looking, attractive young lady from Portland in California. So anyway, that's a little bit of our early courtship, and I put her on the plane back. She flew a comfortable, nice, warm United Airlines plane back to Long Beach, and I drove all the way up to Portland. So anyway, still things hadn't quite gelled the way I wanted them to. In fact, I was corresponding and saying that, hey, it's time I think we got that we became engaged, and I didn't get a very straight answer from her. She was taking a long time to make a decision. So anyway, not long before Christmas, I bought this diamond. Like I said, I was pretty proud of that diamond. I had lots of money then. I bought this, it was almost a full carat emerald cut diamond in a wedding ring, and I carried it around in my trunk, kind of by my spare tire, in the big red bee that I called it. And then, for some reason, I didn't go home for Christmas. It was kind of planned that way, and so fortunately I was invited, or maybe I invited myself, to Jan's house for Christmas. And got this diamond out. And I don't recall whether she cried again, but anyway, she showed it to her father and the rest of her family, and so I don't think I ever got a straight answer whether she'd agreed to marry me from the proposal several months before in the lowlands, the wetlands of the Columbia River, but I assumed that things were go. Anyway, we can summarize that our courtship, I guess, that we met on the 4th of July and were married on the 5th. Actually, it was a year and a day later. Anyway, we did lots of planning, and Jan was going to describe a little incident during the time that she was home there in Portland. And anyway, we did lots of planning. Many letters were exchanged between Portland. Actually, I was stationed then at Mount Hebo Air Force Station, which was south of Tillamook. And we had this really neat secret that we shared, and we were married in the the Logan Temple on the 5th of July of 1957. And then the next day or so, we drove up to Portland, and then we had a reception in Portland. And then shortly thereafter, we took off and spent our honeymoon. I always say it was a trip to Europe, and this is kind of unusual. And after we revealed our plans, after the reception in Portland to my dad just about went into orbit. It really shook him up. My dad is of the old school, that you don't do things like fly to Europe with your new bride for 30 or 40 or 50 years. And so we left, and I'm not sure at the blessings of our families. But nevertheless, we spent about 6 weeks in Europe. We went all over the place, and I guess this really started our gypsyism, our travel adventures. And we've traveled almost every summer, and we think these are really great experiences that we've had. I'm sitting here now in this rocking chair that Dad gave to Jan several years ago. And, you notice I said that he gave it to Jan, not to me. I just want to say another word or two on travel. It all stemmed, as I said, from when Jan honeymooned, and we've traveled ever since. In case it's harder work than staying home. But you can be away, our family, than it might have been. There is no telephone. You can just totally dedicate yourself to your family. And I think we really know each other, and we have grown a lot closer because of all the travel experiences that we've had. We've just had some great, neat travels. I guess the highlights have been a couple of trips to Russia, We've made many trips across country. We've gone on several programs for sponsored by the National Science Foundation. We went to spend a summer back in Maine. We spent a summer in Aspen, Colorado, and it was just a great experience in raising our kids. Just back a little bit, we came to dear old Fort Bragg in the fall of 1958. In fact, we moved up on this hill. It will be 23 years ago. I guess it was 23 years ago in Easter vacation this year. So it'll be 24 years next fall that we moved into Fort Bragg. In fact, just the other night, Pat Rowan was saying, gee, there are not many of us old-timers left, are there? Well, you know, I don't like to be considered an old-timer, but I guess nevertheless I am in the area. So anyway, our original plan was that we would come up here maybe for a year. I finished school down at Berkeley. I went to the University of California to get my California teaching credential after I got out of the Air Force. And then it was fairly difficult to get teaching positions in the cities, but they were fairly numerous out in the boondocks. I was interviewed for a position up in the Sierra, up by Lassen National Park. I was also interviewed for Bakersfield. I'm so glad I didn't go down there and here in Fort Bragg. We drove up one weekday afternoon, just a beautiful day. We drove, I remember, en route to 128 through Booneyville. And then we got over here on the coast late in the evening. I remember the then Superintendent Roscoe Lawson showed me through the old high school then. It was 7 through 12. At 10 o'clock at night, and interviewed me. And of course, I could have signed a position or a contract even before that when I was first interviewed in Berkeley. Anyway, as I started to say, we had intended to stay up here maybe a year, maybe two, and then move down to civilization, like in Santa Rosa. Well, I'm certainly glad we didn't. We were always a little concerned about, because the church was small, there were maybe 4 or 5 at the most, continuously. And so we were really concerned about the lack of activity, particularly of youth. Jan was really converted to Fort Bragg until in Maryland on sabbatical. The first year that we were here, I think we'd been working the 3 previous years, she picked gallons of blackberries. I don't know what happened to all of them, but and then people were really neat to us. We lived out in Lassen's Grove until April. And then we moved into what is now the McMillan House. We added on the house 2 or 3 times. Then we rented another house, and then in 1971 we built this house. So we're glad we didn't move to church. One of the neat things that happened, perhaps the neatest, the first year that we were teaching, is the birth of our son, David. I was in a reserve unit for several years down at Hamilton Air Force Base in Marin County, and so I normally went down on a certain weekend, but I had put it up. I think I went normally the 3rd weekend, but I put it up to the 1st weekend. This was in January of '59. He was going to be born. I got a call late that evening that Jan had gone into labor. And so I was staying with some friends just outside of Berkeley. So I think to this day I probably set the record, and I don't think it's been matched since. Drove my old big red Buick, and I think that really set a record. As I recall, it was less than 3 hours. That may be Graywell Inn, that was then the Redwood Coast Hospital, that the nurse would come to me and said, you know, you're the proud father of a new baby boy. I knew it was a boy because Jan had been x-rayed for twins a day or so before that, and I could tell by the size of the fetuses in a day or so to be David's head, because big heads run in the Bernhisel family. So anyway, that was waited, and I waited, and it was cold, and I thought probably they would forget about me, so periodically I asked. But anyway, I think it was around noon that David, our number 1 son, was born. And that was neat. And just a word about all my kids. They're really great kids. I'm still surprised how easy they have been to raise, and how just, it's probably due to Jan's genes, that they were just so, like I said, easily raised. David I don't think I've ever seen him rebellious in all the time of his life. He's always very patient, and David's been really a neat big brother. We're just really proud of all three of our boys. Steve had a little more difficulty coming along. He was born a couple of years later, and Jan was on the delivery table about 6 hours. Steve is a great kid. I don't think I've ever seen anybody that is less materialistic than Steve. Even when he was a little kid, why, he would never ask for anything for Christmas. Even this last year on his mission in Chicago, he said something for Christmas, and then we pursued it by letter. Steve was just the most, John was born in May, and then the following September, what was then the junior high school, which is now it was further south of the Senior Citizen Center, was burned down by arson. Anyway, and so within 2 or 3 days they had to completely shift the plan. So 30, then she taught full time and I taught full time, and so we kind of said hi to each other as we walked out. And Gladdy had taken care of Dave and some of Steve, and so Gladdy took care of John in the interim between the time that she came before I could leave. And so my point is, John, until he was 3, every afternoon, and I certainly gave him more attention. I changed more peanut butter jobby diapers than the others. And so I think to this day John and I have a special closeness, because I had been able to be home every afternoon because of the double session schedule. And so that was kind of a neat thing about John. And we're so glad we had John, because for the 3 years since Steve is really neat. John is the most affectionate and community. We love them all. I guess now we wish we'd had 10 boys instead of only 3. Just another word on teaching. Jan, like I said, did some substitute work and some part-time teaching. She's taught half-time or full-time nearly always since then. But Jan has really made a sacrifice. Jan, I think, had plans of being a full-time housewife. In fact, we both had plans of her after she finished teaching the year I was in Berkeley. In fact, I put out a sign, "Happy Retirement, Jan." So Jan has sacrificed greatly for not being able to do many of the things that she would like to have done as a full-time housewife. You always have to make a decision. I don't think our kids have suffered from this. In fact, I think they've grown strong because perhaps their mother was not able to do as many things. But Jan's been a great mother. She's been a great teacher, and I want her to know that I appreciate the things that we've been able to do as a family. We undoubtedly could not have had the house we live in. We could not have traveled anywhere nearly to the extent that we have if Jen hadn't made the sacrifices, and still is making, being able to teach and the things that she does. Just finally, I'm sure you're probably getting tired of hearing me, just a reflection a little bit on the